Welcome to Taking the Edge Off the Middle East. I'm Brian Katulis, host of the podcast and senior fellow here at the Middle East Institute. I'm pleased today to have a distinguished diplomat, Jeff Feltman, a former top U.S. diplomat in the Middle East, and also a senior United Nations official with us today. A man I've known, I don't think you know this, for almost 30-some years.
I'd forgotten about the earlier iterations of our friendship, but go ahead.
Yeah, we met in 1996, 97. You were doing what?
Gaza. I was a Gaza watcher.
You were U.S. diplomat in the embassy in Tel Aviv?
Embassy in Tel Aviv, but my assignment was the Gaza Strip, so I would drive to the Gaza Strip 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, and on Friday, go back to the embassy and write my cables.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled we have Jeff on the podcast today for a number of reasons, and as we'll talk about, he's got vast experience over decades serving all around the world, but great knowledge. The other thing why I'm thrilled he's here is that he doesn't like podcasts. He's told me this. He said, Brian, why should I come on? There's so many podcasts. Does anyone have time to listen to this? It's sort of like how I talk to my wife about Netflix series. Like, how many more Netflix series can there be? I don't have the time. So why did you finally come on?
You wore me down. It was easier to come on than to continue to find excuses to say no. I'm just not as comfortable a public speaker as you are.
Oh, come on. You're great. And I've read some of your recent speeches. I've seen you give presentations at big conferences. You're wonderful. But this podcast, as we all know, Taking the Edge Off the Middle East, is a series of casual conversations trying to offer up insider knowledge. And, even though there are many podcasts out there, a couple of years ago, I had a dream. I had a dream that instead of people yelling at each other across social media, we'd sit down with a cup of cheer and take some edge off the Middle East. So welcome to the program, Jeff.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you.
Good. I want to start where we usually start. And I want to say that this is the middle of the summer of 2025. We're about, as recording this, 6 months in, a little past the Trump administration. This episode will come out on August 12th. Which happens to be our son Ben's 15th birthday.
Birthday, Ben.
Yeah. He listens. We love you. We're proud of you, Ben. He tunes in. He gives me all sorts of comments. What's your overall assessment about 6-7 months into the Trump administration, how it's handling its foreign policy and also in the Middle East? What's your top lines?
Brian, I think that when you look at the Trump administration in the Middle East, it's the same as the Trump administration in the rest of the world, that you have an approach to the Middle East that's based on transactions, as the president himself would say, that's based on impulse, that's not conventional, shall I say. That the president seems to be contemptuous of expert opinion. He seems to want to go by gut instinct of what he thinks is best for the United States and what's best for him.
Yeah.
Which I think is the same in his mind, best for the United States and best for him. So you don't really have the type of foreign policy process that you and I recognize from previous administrations. But I'm not saying that's all bad.
Yeah.
I'm not, because when I look at, with all honesty, when I look at sort of conventional policy making as I participated in or as I watched,
right,
and conventional wisdom that emerged in that conventional policy,
right,
some disruption is sometimes good. And I look at the sort of the Syria file as being a good example of this. Now think about the Syria file after December 8th, after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, in the last couple months of the Biden administration, the last 7 or 8 weeks of the Biden administration. At first you had just sort of a watch. What's happening? We all did. We are watching. And then eventually you had the engagement that Barbara Leaf, then Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs, and team did with Ahmed Ashara, the interim president.
Right.
And they had sort of a step-by-step transactional idea that he do this, we will lift those sanctions.
Incentivize them.
Incentivize them by the sanctions, because one of the key constraints facing any government in Syria these days is that thick web of sanctions that the United States has imposed that started in the 70s, but really ramped up after the bloody crackdown of the Arab Spring after 2011.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think had the Biden administration stayed in office, had there been a Democratic administration, had Kamala Harris won, what you would have seen is you would have seen all of these interagency meetings,
Yes.
all of this stuff saying, did he meet this criteria? Did Syria meet this criteria? Well, maybe it's not good enough. That you would have had second guessing, hand wringing.
Yes.
It would have moved very, very slowly, if at all, to everyone's frustration.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to talk a little bit about that because you were the Assistant Secretary of State for the Near East during a tumultuous period, and we'll go back to that, and I want to talk a little bit about it. But you essentially, Trump in May, he ignored some of his top advisors.
Exactly, because Trump comes into office, and you basically had paralysis because you had part of the Trump crowd saying, once a jihadi, always a jihadi.
Yeah.
We can't do anything with these guys. And Trump was originally there. Syria is not our problem, he said before his inauguration.
Yeah.
You remember, but we shouldn't have anything to do with these guys. They were jihadis. They're always jihadis. Then you had another group that was basically following the expert lines from that you have the transactional incentivized approach.
Right.
Which would have, again, led to all sorts of paralysis if you actually went that way.
Red tape and indecision.
So Trump, listening, I'm sure being persuaded by Mohammed bin Salman and Erdogan by phone, just broke through all that. Through it all. And then the next day, after making the speech in Riyadh about lifting all the sanctions, his intention to lift all the sanctions, he talked to the press about, look at all the applause I got. Look at all the applause.
Yeah.
So part of this is performance.
Right.
Part of this is, and he got the performance that he wanted at that point, and the Syria policy evolved.
Yes, and he also got the Village People's YMCA at the end of his speech, if you remember that, which is so interesting and curious and things like that.
But the bottom line is that conventional process, conventional wisdom isn't always the answer.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that. If you were, I do this assessment every quarter. I think you've seen it, and mine just came out at the end of July, a report card on the Trump administration on different factors. And one factor, obviously, in the first 6 months was Iran. If there's sort of a top priority for U.S. administrations, it's how do you deal with Iran? We saw the 12-day war Israel prosecuted against Iran, the U.S. jumping in on one night. With that, what letter grade, 6-7 months into the administration, would you give the administration, or could you give a letter grade? Is it incomplete? How do you characterize what they've done so far on Iran?
I don't know if I can give a letter grade. I know that's what you do in your thing, but that's kind of, I guess I'm too much of a traditionalist to come up with that sort of soundbite on the grade.
Yeah.
But I think Iran demonstrates both what's potentially positive about this disruptive approach by Trump and what's negative about it.
Right.
The positive thing is he was willing to talk to the Iranians right away. There was no sort of ideological basis against talking to the Iranians.
Even though they tried to kill him.
Even though they tried to kill him. And so there's none of this. I mean, imagine if Biden had said, let's go to do direct talks with the Iranians. First of all, he wouldn't have said it. He would have thought about, what do the Israelis think? What are the Republicans going to say? It would have had all sorts of interagency meetings. And Trump just said, we should do this. And he did this despite the Israeli hesitations.
Yeah.
I think that's positive.
Right.
The negative is that he says basically mission accomplished after 12 days.
Obliterated.
That the nuclear program's obliterated, mission accomplished. I mean, the equivalent of George Bush's mission accomplished.
Yeah.
It's not. Iran is weaker. Iran is more isolated than it's been in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But the nuclear program is not eliminated. The ballistic missiles did cause damage in Israel. The ballistic missile program could probably be reconstructed, or who knows what's left of it. The nuclear knowledge hasn't gone away.
Right.
You recently saw the testing of a satellite operated rocket of suborbital flight. Iran can still be a problem, and the fact that Trump doesn't sweat the details and basically wanted to be able to say it's all over with. I think that's a problem.
Do you think his people sweat the details? Like, does Steve Witkoff, do Tom Barak, they come from a business background, and it's quite unconventional. But again, it's hard to tell from the outside. But as a distinguished former diplomat who served across the region with the United States and UN, do you see a semblance of a diplomatic game plan here being crafted?
I see we read about Witkoff's travels, and so I think that there's a diplomatic effort that's being made, and certainly Barak has been very active on the Syria file and the Lebanon file to some extent. But do they have the type of infrastructure that follows through? I mean, I don't want to overstate how wonderful those of us who are Middle East experts are, because we've had lots of failures. I've been part of lots of failed processes, but it does bother me that there doesn't seem to be the type of team that's developing around these people that can follow up on the individual things. And even if you go back to that Trump visit in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar back in mid-May, where's the follow up for all those deals that were signed? Why isn't there like a White House czar that's supposed to be following up all that? So I don't see the type of follow-up that a process would create. And that concerns me.
No, and so I want to talk a bit more about Iran and then your own personal experience. You went, as I understand, from being the top U.S. diplomat on the Middle East under the Obama administration, the first administration, and you went to the UN and you got a very senior position, Undersecretary General for Political Affairs. First, how do you get a job like that for kids that are out there that want to be the future UN Undersecretary General for Political Affairs? Did you just respond to an ad in a newspaper and send in your resume, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, first of all, you could call me the equivalent of a Schedule C political appointee at the UN, because my qualifications were I was an American citizen, and the American government wanted an American citizen in that position.
Right.
Just as the French have peacekeeping, just as the Chinese have the Undersecretary General for Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the Russians have counterterrorism. The British have humanitarian affairs. So the P5, the permanent members of the Security Council, all have a citizen in a very senior UN position. Now, as you say, I went from the State Department. I retired. I left the State Department and went on to the UN. How did this happen? Susan Rice was going to Libya. I was on Susan Rice's Libya trip. Samantha Power and I had a fight in the NSC over some subject that I've since forgotten. And we decided that on the night before the Libya trip, we were staging it from Malta, that Samantha and I decided we'd go out to dinner, that we would try to address our issue by going out to dinner and having a conversation.
And diplomats talking, right?
Right. So whatever the issue was that Samantha and I had, this is Arab Spring, and she was like the revolutionary. I was kind of the counter-revolution, the whole Arab Spring debate.
Right.
And we solved the issue. We come back to the hotel, and she said, "Oh, by the way, I need to ask you, Ban Ki-moon, then the Secretary General of the United Nations, asked us if we want to keep an American citizen in the position of Undersecretary General for Political Affairs." My predecessor was Lynn Pascoe, another U.S. diplomat who focused in Asia. He was the first U.S. citizen in that position. But Ban Ki-moon has a condition for us. If you want to keep an American citizen in that position, it's the Arab Spring and all that, I want someone that knows the Middle East. And so Samantha said, "Do you know anyone from your bureau, from one of your embassies that would like to do it?" I'd never thought about working for the UN at least not since I was, like a youngin' in college. So I said, "Well, I'll do it." She said, "What?" And it kind of went from there.
It went from there. Yeah. So I had a similar experience. I don't know if you know this, but at one point in 2013, I was appointed to not an illustrious position like yours, but I was on the UN panel of experts for Libya. And Ban Ki-moon, but through, I think it was Susan Rice, and I was the regional expert and spent a year on that. We're going to talk a little bit about multilateralism. I might reference that experience there, but let's go back to your position at the UN. And here's the key thing. And I want to hear your story. You actually are one of the few Americans, I think, to have met the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei.
Robin Wright met him, but Robin Wright met him when he was president, not supreme leader.
So
I think I might be the only non-Iranian American. I'm sure there must be Iranian Americans.
Of course.
Who have met him.
And that was in 2012?
It was in 2012. So I left the State Department in May of 2012, joined the UN at July 1st, 2012. By late August, I was sitting in the inner office of the supreme leader of Iran.
Wow.
It was a very strange experience.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, the Secretary General got an invitation from the Iranians to attend the non-aligned summit that the Iranians were hosting that year. The non-aligned movement is the largest single member state movement within the United Nations. It's 120 member states out of 193.
Right.
So there's no way the Secretary General could say no to an invitation to address the non-aligned summit. But every bone in my body said this is a bad idea, because I had been trained. I'd been ambassador to Lebanon pushing against Iran. I had been NEA Assistant Secretary of State pushing against Iran. So every instinct was this is a bad idea. But of course now I work for the UN. I don't work for the U.S. And he has to go. What do I do? Because I know that my former employers are going to have a fit about this when this gets out. So I proposed, well, let's change the picture. So right now it's a state visit that you fly from New York to the non-aligned summit. You dress the non-aligned summit. You have all the hoopla. Let's stop in Riyadh for a couple of days. Let's come back via Abu Dhabi,
Uh-huh.
or maybe the reverse. I can't remember which order we did it. But it suddenly looks like a regional trip. It no longer looks like it's just a gift
Going
to
there.
Iran.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because this was the period when the U.S. position on Iran was isolate and pressure. There was some hints of private diplomacy that developed later that year. Jake Sullivan, Bill Burns
Through Oman. Yeah.
But at this point, the public position was definitely, you should pressure. So anyway, we went to the non-aligned summit. But I mean, Hillary Clinton and Susan Rice still called Ban Ki-moon and said you shouldn't go. But I think that was more performative on their part. They had to do it, even though they knew he would go.
Yeah.
So anyway, obviously my first trip to Tehran. And we arrived at the airport, and it was chaos. I didn't expect chaos. The conference was sort of chaotic. I think sessions started late. Meals were. I had not anticipated.
It's very Middle Eastern.
It's much more Middle Eastern than I had anticipated.
Yeah.
But this was also the time when Ahmadinejad was president.
Oh yeah.
When Ahmadinejad and Khamenei were saying things like push the Jews into the sea, is the Zionist entity.
Yeah, they live at it from time to time.
It was like the nadar of the sort of Iranian rhetoric. We had but let me start with the supreme leader.
Yeah, what was that like sitting with him?
Well, we started off with a protocol meeting. So it was large. It was like 10 people on each side. And then after perfunctory greetings, the supreme leader, Khamenei, said to Ban Ki-moon, would you like to come to my inner office for a more private discussion? Bring one of your advisors. So Ban Ki-moon brought me.
Wow. And there's a photo of that, right?
There's a photo of that.
Yeah,
there's a photo of that. My expression looks like my expression captures just how strange of an experience this was. And the supreme leader had one of the vice presidents who was later convicted of corruption and thrown into Evin prison, was his plus one.
Okay.
So there were four of us plus an interpreter.
Yeah.
But so there I am sitting there thinking, I'm listening to this guy that I've been studying about, I've been reading intel reports about, that we've been obsessively trying to figure out for decades. No charisma.
So I was wondering, how does it feel?
No charisma. Very, very light voice. He had sort of a benevolent look to his eyes. And of course his right arm is crippled because of a earlier bombing attempt.
Right.
But for 3 hours, it was a monologue about the United States.
Wow. He said good things, right?
Oh yeah. But I listened to him and thought, okay. I mean, the depth of animosity and distrust was greater than I had anticipated, even though I've read all these intel reports that that's kind of who he is.
Right.
The identification of the Islamic Republic with anti-Americanism and the anti-Israeli stuff, of course, was there as well. But I kept thinking, okay, we Americans surely have lacuna. We have gaps in our knowledge about Iran. Our gaps are not nearly as big as his gaps.
Yeah, they don't know you. So do you think how did they treat you personally? And did they have the file read on you? Because you were the ambassador in Lebanon during the Cedar Revolution. I heard stories recently talking to friends that your face was hit with shoes, like the posters, your face on a poster and things like this. You weren't.
My wife Mary said sent me an email and said they're hitting your post, they're hitting your face, your picture with your shoes.
Right.
That's a really good picture. Where'd Hezbollah get that picture?
You look charming there. Yeah. But how did they treat you when you were on the ground in Tehran? And did you have any like incidents or anything like this?
Yeah. I don't think Khamenei had any idea who I was.
Yeah.
I don't,
but he knew you were American, obviously.
I was just an aide to Ban Ki-moon. I don't think he had any idea. His speech was not for me. I don't believe. But we rehearsed Ban Ki-moon's remarks in Ban Ki-moon's hotel suite that night, because we saw Khamenei and Ahmadinejad on day one. Day two was the actual summit. What were we going to do? What would the UN Secretary General do, who's the third speaker after Khamenei, after Ahmadinejad, if Ahmadinejad or Khamenei talked about destroying one of the member states of the UN?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Or kill all the Jews. The Ban Ki-moon would have to respond.
Yes.
So we sort of play acted in his hotel suite. That if they say this, you say this. We sort of play acted. And Ban Ki-moon had cards that he sort of wrote down suggested responses to various potentially provocative statements, and clipped them to the speech, so that he would have sort of a prompt of what he had rehearsed, what he could say.
Yeah.
He was a very principled person to work for, but he was not the most nimble speaker, shall I say.
He's not a politician.
Yeah,
he's not a Bill Clinton
he needed the prompts.
Yeah.
So at night, but of course we're in the hotel room. Certainly, hotel rooms in Tehran must have ears.
Oh yeah.
So he said to me that I should take the speech, the one speech that had all the little note cards taped to it, and ride with him to the conference center the following day.
Yes.
Because he didn't want to walk into the conference center holding a speech that had all this stuff coming out of it. And it's not like Hillary Clinton and the Secretary of State. There's not like a whole bunch of staff that hover around him the way you do as an American official. So I took the speech with all the little notes, and paranoid about the fact that we probably had been listened to, I slept with it under my pillow.
Wow.
Because I was convinced that someone's going to come into my hotel room at night and take the speech.
Fair point. Yeah.
So next morning we go down, and Ban Ki-moon says, "You ride next to me. You ride next to me." So we go out to the motorcade. Ban Ki-moon gets in, the seat that the VIP sits in behind, the one behind the passenger side.
Yeah.
I go around the car to get into the seat behind the driver behind him, and a bunch of Iranian thugs, big Iranian thugs in suits, grab me.
These are like official security folks?
Security.
Wow.
With the backwards collars, shirts, and they started dragging me down the street, and I started yelling, "No! I'm supposed to ride with the Secretary General.
Right.
The Secretary General." And Ban Ki-moon's looking out the back of the limo, just sort of confused, like, what's going on? Like, I'm supposed to ride with him, and where am I?
And you've got the speech,
and I have the speech. So I'm clinging to the speech as I'm being dragged down the street, and in front of the old Hyatt hotel that's now something like the Revolution Hotel, whatever it is now.
Soon to be the Trump. Just kidding. No.
But, and this is all happening so fast. People say, "Were you scared?" It's like it happened too fast for me to be scared at that moment.
Yeah.
They threw me into a car way back, about halfway back the motorcade. So I thought, well, that was, and the two guys that were in the car, the two UN staff that were in the car, Terry Rod Larson, and Martin Nazarski, who was the spokesman, they both said, "Jeff, you're supposed to write the Secretary General." I said, I know. but I then relaxed and thought, well, that was just
you're just going with them, and that's it.
Weird.
Yeah.
I'm still in the motorcade. So we go up we drive up the highway toward the convention center. People who know Tehran would probably know where all this is. Because it's my first trip to Tehran. Not my last, but it was my first. And it's funny, all the posters for the Donald Summit were the atom, with the nucleus and the whatever all that stuff's called, with the dove of peace flying up.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Were the posters all the way up there. As the motorcade starts to turn left into the parking lot or into the driveway of the convention center, our car speeds up and turns right.
Whoa.
So Martin Nazarski, Terry Rod Larson, and I are also yelling at the driver, no, you got to go with the motorcade, the motorcade.
Yeah.
And
you didn't have Waze. You didn't have the Israeli app Waze.
And we had also all left our cell phones in Abu Dhabi. We didn't want to bring any of our electronic stuff into Iran. So we started yelling at the driver, "Go back, you got the motorcade." And he kept saying, "No English, no English." Now, how likely is that? Carrying around foreign officials, UN officials.
Yeah.
So he kept driving. We kept yelling. We were all, excited. And I'm holding the speech. I've only been in this job for 2 months, thinking I'm losing my job.
You're fired.
2 months.
Yeah.
I retired from the State Department. I can't go back there. So he drove it was a Friday. He drove to a park and just turned the car off, parked the car.
What?
Rolled the windows down, started smoking. And we're all going, hey.
We got to be somewhere. The boss is going to be pissed.
And this is
right.
And this is some nice park in North Tehran.
Yeah.
And there was Friday, the holy day, the day off. So there were people out having picnics, blankets. It was having tea. It was a nice looking scene.
Yeah.
But we're just hysterical.
And you're like in your suits and your straps.
And I'm still holding the speech under my arm. And so Martin Nazarski, the spokesman, Ban Ki-moon, who also needed to be there in case there was press, needed to be at the convention center. Terry Rod Larson is kind of, I think if he didn't make it, it wouldn't have been a terrible loss. But anyway, Martin went up to it. There was a policeman, just a normal civil policeman.
Not
in
the
park.
thugs. Yeah.
Not the park. And so Martin went up to try to get him to help. Well, the last thing that this policeman wanted on his Friday were distressed foreigners.
Yes.
He did not want to have to deal with distressed foreigners.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. Anyway, we eventually got back to the convention center. It's a longer story. We eventually got back to the convention center. The convention center guards looked at my UN laissez-passer and said, the convention center is on lockdown. You can't enter.
Wow.
We sneaked in through the loading dock to the kitchens.
Wow. And you got the speech and you got reconnected, reunited, and felt so good with the boss?
Well, one last step. As I crossed the main lobby after having left the kitchens and the back door, and I was crossing the lobby with the speech still intact under my arm, the Iranian perm rep to the UN, Ambassador Khamenei at the time, saw me and he said, "Ambassador Feltman, we were under the impression that you would not be attending the opening ceremony."
Oh, interesting. So that was a question I was going to ask you about this whole story. One, was this just buffoonery and disorganization, or this was intentional? And if intentional, what does it tell you? What does this episode tell you about how the Iranian system operates?
I think it was intentional.
Right.
And it was a real contrast between the chaos that you saw everywhere else, and this organized focus on what was Ban Ki-moon going to say at the non-aligned summit. Could he embarrass the Islamic Republic? And I don't think it was about Jeff Feltman. It was about the fact that I was the one carrying the speech.
But you got it to him, and
we got it to him in time. And in the end,
did you talk to Ban about Ban Ki-moon?
He didn't realize until I don't think we talked about it until after we left Iran, because when you're in these programs, there's a million moving parts, and I don't know that I had any private time with him. I don't think I told him about it after.
But he didn't really know that all this was happening.
He didn't know it was all happening. And had the Iranians been organized in terms of the conference, I would have missed my moment.
Right.
Because I only made it to give him the speech because they were delayed in starting.
Oh, there you go. Just back to the thing. So what does this tell you about the Iranian system and situation? It's 2012. It's also the attempts, you were saying, it was an earlier period of maximum pressure. People don't realize that the Obama administration actually was pretty tough to get to the deal that they got in 2015, and economic sanctions and things like this. You mentioned a little bit about it. But what does this tell you, also carry it forward to the current moment? And the guy is still in power, right? This is 13 years later, and you described what it was like to be in the room with him. What is this? Yeah.
And this I think is the problem for the diplomacy that I hope the Trump administration will pursue. He does not. That lack of trust, that conviction that Khamenei has that the U.S. is not to be trusted, that the U.S. is all about regime change, that the U.S. will do anything to get rid of the Islamic Republic. That conviction has to have been reinforced by the subsequent years, by the fact that Trump pulled out of the JCPOA.
Yeah,
that just reinforces what Khamenei thought was thinking all along. That paranoia about the U.S. intentions, and then the idea that you have Witkoff going through 5 rounds of talks. And first you talk about civilian enrichment at low levels, but then you say no enrichment whatsoever. Then you schedule a 6th talk, but in the meantime, the Israelis start bombing you.
Right.
And then the U.S. joins in. This to me, I think is the real dilemma. When we look at Iran today, what are the assurances that we, the Americans, the Europeans and others, what are the assurances that we would believe that Iran is not going nuclear? What are the assurances? And that's a hard question to answer. The JCPOA had certain assurances, but they were thrown away, and they weren't ironclad anyway.
Yeah.
And what are the assurances that Khamenei would need to say, okay, if I denuclearize, if I don't go for the bomb, if I either have no enrichment or maintain just low level enrichment like in the JCPOA, how do I know that they aren't really going to go for regime change?
Right.
What are the assurances that Iran needs? And I think this question of assurances, the two-way assurances, is the hardest nut to crack. It's harder than I think the question of enrichment.
So, I mean, it's hard to predict, but you would guess that it's more likely there could be more military conflict over this rather than a smooth path to diplomacy on Iran. I'm not saying what you wish for. I would say as a diplomat, you probably want diplomacy. But when you look at sort of the factors that are out there,
I think that one of the major developments that came out of the 12-day war was this idea that, yes, the United States can bomb and will bomb Iran's nuclear facilities. I think that there are probably a lot of people, both in this country as well as in Iran, that thought, the U.S. is never actually going to do it. Well, they did. And so it's clear that option remains on the table. Obviously, Israeli intelligence has penetrated Iran to an astonishing degree. So I think this must be taken into account when Khamenei looks at this question too. Is okay, they did bomb us and they could do it again.
Yeah.
But I simply, the mowing the grass approach that the Israelis used with Lebanon and with Hamas in Gaza obviously did not work to prevent on October 7th.
Right. Yeah.
And I would hope that we would use diplomacy rather than the mowing the grass approach when it comes to the Iran nuclear program.
Yeah, it's easier to destroy things and to attack and eliminate enemies. It's harder to build and construct things that last and produce a sustainable, peaceful environment that actually brings long-term security. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground here in a short period of time. And it's hard because with a guy like you, and I want to have like 2 or 3 sessions with you because of the depth of your experience, and even an hour here on a podcast won't do it justice. Another area of the world that I think is quite often overlooked, but I think increasingly because of the Houthi threat from Yemen and what's happened in the Red Sea, and you work this issue, is the Horn of Africa. Of the many positions that you held, you were U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, more or less in the first year of the Biden administration. Now, I'm going to remind you of something else that you probably have forgotten about me, but we reconnected at one point when I joined MEI. I left the Center for American Progress, and we were at a cocktail hour for the Middle East Institute board. And
I remember.
You were on the board.
Yes.
And maybe you won't remember, maybe you won't like me saying what you told me at that time, but you were, let me just put it this way, frustrated about the interagency process that you were experiencing.
It was maddening.
Why?
It's the 180-degree opposite of what's happening now. Now there's no process. Then there was nothing but process.
Right.
And the inability to come to decisions because of the constant meeting schedule, the rethinking, the hand-wringing, the second-guessing. I mean, I found it maddening. I'll be honest. I found the Biden NSC to be maddening.
Yeah. So this is what I remember from that night. It would have been in October of 2021. So you were sort of close to the end of your tenure. You did a year-long stint, more or less. And I think you were about to get on a plane to go to Ethiopia or someplace in East Africa. And what I understood and remembered was that you thought you had a decision that was made in a meeting that you were in, but then it was overturned later on. And this is not an infrequent sort of occurrence that I think had happened.
Yes.
Under not only the Biden administration, but I'd heard stories like this under the Obama administration. Why this is important for people who don't know how U.S. policy works is that this striking the right balance between action and decision that leads to action and delegation and then moving on things versus what some people call the paralysis of analysis, of thinking through things and rethinking through things, right?
Admiring the problem.
Yeah.
And remember, this was before the October 7th. This was before the Gaza war. So the war in Ethiopia at the time, where hundreds of thousands of people were dying either by warfare or starvation, was a big focus of the Biden administration. So, maybe if it had been like the Arab Spring when everything's happening at once, we wouldn't have been able to over deliberate as much as we did for the Horn of Africa. But it was the peace and security issue at the time that was going on, which allowed everyone to focus on this. But there was a second frustration I had that I think I find it more understandable, but it was still frustrating to try to be this U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa that's related more to the Middle East region we're talking about. As much as, say, the Gulf countries have tried to reconcile their view toward the region, toward Syria, toward Yemen. We're way past the boycott of Qatar, where these countries the GCC countries have tried to work together with a common approach toward Syria and other things.
Yeah.
They don't have a common approach when it comes to the Horn of Africa.
Right.
They're still playing out their differences when it comes to Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia. And they are very actively involved. You've got local grievances that are exacerbated by the outside actors, and I'll throw Egypt into the category too of the outside actors who are involved. So I would go to Abu Dhabi, Cairo, Doha, Ankara, and be received very well.
Yes. Yeah.
People knew me from my
Yes,
AA
of
days,
course,
from the UN
yeah,
days.
yeah.
So I would get high-level meetings, and I would talk about, okay, this is our analysis of how you would stabilize Ethiopia. This is our analysis of how you would prevent Sudan from falling apart before Sudan did fall apart. But we really need, whatever country it is, country X, to work with us on this particular issue. And they would give me the time to listen, analysis. And I often did some diplomatic theater. I would take like an intel guy with me because that would make me look more important. I have an intel guy.
Yeah.
But I did not see the heads of state. With the exception of Sisi, I did see Egyptian President Sisi on the Ethiopian dam
Yeah,
issue.
of course, that was a big issue. Yeah.
But the others, I was seeing sub-heads of state. So I would come back to Washington and say, I think I got some momentum here, but the heads of state need to know, oh, President Biden's going to be talking to Mohammed bin Zayed, Jeff, give us a couple lines, just a summary, just enough, and that's all I needed, was just enough to reinforce the longer presentation that I would have been giving to Tafnoon or Abdullah bin Zayed or whoever. And again, I'm not singling out the UAE; it's all we do this for all the countries.
Yeah.
So then I get the call from the NSC saying, "Well, the president has a phone call with Amir or the head of state, whatever, and we never got to your point.
Yeah.
The agenda was so long, we never got to your points.
Yeah."
And now that's one I sort of understand, given the
There were a lot going on there, right?
A lot going on, but it was a crippling element of trying to work with the Biden administration, in that I could advocate for something, but I didn't get the senior level reinforcement.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about this, and a lot of people don't think about this and the interlinkage of all of this. And I remember one time Secretary Madeleine Albright, who was a friend and mentor of mine for years, and she, who had served like at the highest echelons of diplomacy and had taught at Georgetown University, she would have great difficulty sometimes tracking the various different Gulf countries and then how they were playing running different plays in different parts of the world, right? It is complicated because you know it, I know it, we live it. But a lot of people who have to deal with the whole world and then set that agenda for the whole world, and if you're the president of the United States. So it is complicated. But your point is taken, is that these things are interlinked, and that sometimes these countries, I remember you telling me at the time, have a lot more sway in shaping outcomes than we do directly, and that we should have some sort of way to coordinate this back here. And if you could do one thing differently that you think, besides sort of getting more than Biden to say at least one thing about this in MBZ, what do you think could be done to try to fix that dilemma? To two different regions of the world that are very much interlinked, we're playing a role in it. Like, what would you change about that? I know it's a tough question.
I think I would try to have, if you're going to have a special envoy position such as I have, names matter. It should be special envoy for the Red Sea region.
Not just for the
Horn.
The Horn.
Because the
why was it defined that way?
The locals see this region as integrated.
Yeah.
They recognize, the security, political, economic linkages from one side of the Red Sea to the other.
Right.
But when you're the Horn of Africa envoy, like I remember, for example, there was I was criticized publicly by some people saying, "Hey, what's the Horn of Africa envoy doing in Abu Dhabi and Ankara and Doha and Riyadh? Doesn't he look at a map?" And my response was, "Yeah, I look at a geopolitical map."
Right, exactly.
But I think that there needs to be a way to bridge the stovepiping that occurs across the board. Like, when I would go to the embassies in the U.S. embassies, these are friends of mine who are ambassadors to DCMs, people I work with.
Yeah.
But the Horn of Africa was not a high priority for them.
Right.
They were dealing with bilateral issues that were far different than the ones I was working on. So there wasn't really a system set up. And so I think you need to have like a Red Sea task force type approach if you're going to have a process.
Yeah. And what you're saying, and drawing it back to the earlier discussion about the Trump administration, where there's no process at all,
right.
And it was excessive process, but in this case, there wasn't enough process that brought the linkages of different regions together. You need to do it in a way that's actually pretty precise, very efficient, but actually gets results. And that's a key lesson I draw from a lot of what you said. Maybe one last thing on the Horn before we move to sort of your longer experience in the Middle East for a few minutes. I remember another story, and maybe if you don't want to talk about it as well, there was a alleged threat to the embassy, I think, in Addis towards the end, and this is after the Kabul pullback. Does this ring any bells and things like that?
It rings very ominous bells.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to talk about the specifics behind that and sort of what was done, but there's a longer term trajectory. And you knew Chris Stevens. There were the embassy bombings in 1998. We're going to go back sort of in this conversation a little bit through your career, a little bit on that. But this understandable risk aversion to keep diplomats safe. But how do you think about sort of the trajectory of all of that?
There was not a threat against Embassy Addis. There was a perceived threat against Embassy Addis by the White House.
Right.
And the White House folks, again, understandably, were looking at Addis through the lenses of Benghazi and Kabul.
And Kabul 2021, which was something that many of them say was one of their proudest moments, that we ended the war in Afghanistan.
But we know how messy the end of that war was, and of course Benghazi was trauma for all of us. I mean,
right.
I'd already left the U.S. government by then, but it was still trauma. But anyway, what the problem was that the Tigrayans, who were the insurgents from northern Ethiopia, were moving toward Addis.
Yeah.
So the White House was envisioning the Tigrayans taking over Addis in the same way the Taliban took over Kabul.
Right.
And so therefore we have to get the embassy evacuated so that we don't have similar pictures. The Tigrayans like us. The Tigrayans ran Ethiopia for years when they had a very close relationship with Washington.
Yeah.
We were in touch with the Tigrayans every day.
And the embassy knew it, and you knew it because you were.
And we knew it. But the micromanagers at the White House worried about a repetition of Kabul, worried about the aftermath of Benghazi, basically forced the embassy to evacuate almost all its staff in very short notice. And the Tigrayans never did get to Addis.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I remember you telling me that story and the costs of that and where that left us. Let me pivot. We got some time here, and this is sort of where you spent the brunt of your career. We talked a bit about where we met in Israel and the Palestinian territories back in the 1990s. And we talked a bit about how you think President Trump on Syria has done a bold move to engage. Like, he went from basically he and J.D. Vance, when they were the president-elect and vice president-elect, when Ahmed Ashara swept into power, they said, stay the heck out. And now they're starting to engage, I think, motivated. And the arguments that Saudis and others in the region have said that this is a golden moment to do that. But you were ambassador in Lebanon as well. How do you think 6-7 months into the administration, the Trump administration's handling all of this, when you look at what's happened and what they're doing to the State Department and all of the dismissals that we've heard from Marco Rubio's sort of plan to reform or change the agency, how do you add this all up in terms of what potential do you think the U.S. will really have to shape and influence events in both Syria and Lebanon in the next few years?
I mean, I'm not going to get into a guessing game about what offices should and shouldn't be saved in the department. That's not for me. But what I am concerned about is the way that the dismissals have been done, and it's very arbitrary. If you happen to be a star officer that was in an office that got eliminated, you got eliminated.
Yeah.
As opposed to you've got dead wood at Embassy X, and then dead wood stays. If they had decided to do a reduction in force based on those who were low ranked in their annual evaluations, it would have made more sense. But I do worry that it's not only a question of eliminating the experts; it's a question of having contempt for the experts that remain. The fact that expertise is not valued. And again, as I said earlier, I don't want to overstate how wonderful we all were.
Yeah.
But it makes it harder if you have absolutely no regional understanding.
Yeah.
And I think Syria's a case in point, because we've seen a pattern now in Syria. I'm glad the Trump administration has been trying to engage Shara. I think that's the right thing to do at this moment. But look at the pattern. You had the Alawite massacres in Latakia and Banias in March. Then you had the violence against the Druze in the suburbs of Damascus in April and May. Now we have the Suwaida. More recently, there was the Suwaida case in southern Syria. I think that what we can see is that Shara, the interim president, can't control his forces.
Yeah.
and that the minorities, Druze, Alawite, etc., have no trust in Shar. Whatever benefit of the doubt he might have been given is gone. And this is going to make the issue of integrating the Kurds, which is a requirement of the Turks, that much harder. The SDF in northeast Syria, led by the Kurds. The Kurds are going to be looking at what happened to the Alawites, what happened to the Druze, and say, now wait a minute, why should we give up our arms? Why should we integrate? So I see a serious security deterioration in Syria that's matched by a political alienation of the minorities that I think is quite dangerous.
Yeah,
and I don't know that we have the bandwidth to actually start negotiating. I mean, Barak is trying. I don't know what's happening in these meetings, but he's meeting with Mazloum, the Kurdish leader of the SDF. He's bringing him together with Shara, the interim president. Good, but is there the follow-up? Is there sort of the we don't have an embassy there?
I was just going to ask you, you need a team on the ground because you were, again, the top U.S. diplomat on the Middle East during a tumultuous period. We'll spend a few minutes talking about this. And trying to manage all of that, you actually need steady day-to-day diplomacy, people who are on the ground talking to officials and understanding the situation, and that filters up to a senior diplomat like you and others. My presumption is that's not really I mean, it's certainly not happening in Syria because we don't have a presence, as you just said. And how do you then shape outcomes if we're unilaterally, I think it's a unilateral disarmament of diplomacy. Certainly some things could be discarded. There's a lot of inefficiencies there, but we're not even showing up day to day, I don't think.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And I know that embassy is not, the U.S. Embassy of Damascus is not a safe facility. It's right on the road. It could, we had trouble with, we were worried about it when I was assistant secretary, which is back before the flood.
Yeah.
But you could use the ambassador's residence to have a small team on the ground. That Barak could have a small team on the ground now.
Yeah.
That's living and working out of the residence, which does have the setback required from a security point of view. The Syrians could have their embassy reopened here so that they'd be dealing with Washington directly. But we're basically bit players compared to the Gulf and Turkey and Israel.
Yeah. So last night I was having we had Dan Shapiro and his wife over for dinner, and they were he was telling me about a story. I was like, "Tell me about Jeff Feltman." Did you guys went to Damascus?
A few times. Yeah. It was when Obama came into office in 2009, and he wanted to sort of defrost the relationship with Syria and try to defrost the relationship with Iran. With Iran, he sent 2 letters to the Supreme Leader.
Yes.
Which the Supreme Leader talked about to Ban Ki-moon, dismissing them as just propaganda. And then for Syria, he sent Dan Shapiro and me to try to see if we could work on a transactional step-by-step thing. Our focus at the time was to stop the Syrians from facilitating foreign fighters into Iraq.
Yeah.
Was our primary goal.
Yeah. And you were sent, I mean, this is how Dan described it, the combo of you were seen because of your tenure as the former U.S. ambassador to Lebanon, that you would not sell out the country of Lebanon in the face of what Damascus had tried to dominate that country. And we won't have time to get into the Cedar Revolution and all of that because your rich history of diplomacy and service to country, I think, is known by a lot of folks. But and Dan was seen as someone who had a strong relationship with Israel. He ultimately became the U.S. ambassador to Israel under Obama. What was your impression when you met with the Assad regime at the time?
That we were doing the same thing that many, many people had done before, which is that all the Americans who go to Syria think that they can make some progress.
Warren Christopher.
And they never do.
Yeah.
Under Assad. Maybe now under Shah will be different.
Yeah.
But Dan and I were working on again a step-by-step transactional plan. They do, and we were. The way that we approached the question of foreign fighters is we never said, we know you guys are facilitating foreign fighters, which is what was happening.
Yeah.
What we said was, gosh, isn't it terrible your territory is being abused? Gosh, isn't it terrible this place is being used?
Why wouldn't you call them out like that? What?
Because we were trying a different approach to see if we could, and it didn't work. So we like many,
and it didn't work. Why? Why do you think when you look back on that?
In the end, the Syrians blinked. And we had worked out sort of a step-by-step plan. The first thing we would have done was release some airline parts for Syrian Airlines, based on closing down some of the transit of foreign fighters. But in the end, the Syrians stopped pursuing and even almost pretended they'd never had these discussions with us before. It was very strange.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Arab Spring broke out.
Right. No, and I want to ask you about a lot of that because you said earlier in your you had dinner with Samantha Power and you can't even remember what the dispute was, but you were a bit more, she was more for freedom and revolution. And this has all been written about in various books, especially in 2011, 2012.
We were talking about the Jacobins and the sans-culottes. We would.
Yeah. And you described yourself as someone who, and maybe more skeptical about what might come around the corner if these authoritarian regimes essentially crumble and what happens there. So, like when you think about the Syria case and then that war went on, my God, for more than a dozen years and hundreds of thousands of people killed, millions sort of pushed out of the country. I think, and this is just my view, that if the Iraq war in 2003 was where we sort of lost our minds, meaning that we didn't see things correctly and we lost sort of a sense of perspective because of 9/11 and we had all of these different visions of the fear and the threat of Saddam hitting us with a nuclear weapon and terrorism and things like that. Syria was the place where we lost our soul, meaning that we actually saw that there were many abuses, most of them coming from the regime. But we were reluctant to engage when the war broke out. And just the tensions between, I don't know, again, what you and Samantha were debating, but that tension between people's desire for freedom, but then the desire for order. And I don't know where you land on that these days.
Well, Brian, I think that when you look back at 2011, think about some of these countries eventually stabilized.
Yeah.
But Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Bahrain, Jordan, Yemen, they all had protest movements in 2011.
Yep.
And we were trying to deal with all of this at the same, like how many interagency meetings do you think we had on Morocco and Algeria in a normal time?
Right.
None.
Yeah, but how did you handle that? Like just on a functional 20, you have 24 hours in a day, 7 days in the week, just as anyone else.
That was what I regret most is that we did not have enough time to consider the policies for each country, that we were basically reactive and winging it because so much was happening at the same time.
Yeah.
I remember going over to the NSC in the morning for whatever interagency meetings we had with a stack of files that would say Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen, and we would go from one meeting to the next. Well, how thoughtful can you be?
Yeah.
On that. And so I don't think that we had sufficient time to really consider the options. Take Libya, for example. The Libya uprising started in mid-February.
Right.
By mid-March, we had the Security Council resolution.
Yes.
It was only 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the GCC had passed a resolution calling on the world to protect the Libyan civilians.
Yes.
Now, that was completely cynical. For them to distract everyone from what was happening in Bahrain.
Yeah.
And to show that they were on the side of the Libyan people. And then you had the Arab League take up the same thing with only Syria and Algeria abstaining, calling for this. There became a certain inevitability, and that we were being reactive rather than leading in so many of these cases. And then you had add to that Sarkozy on Libya.
Yeah,
that Sarkozy was the one really pushing in the West for Libya, with David Cameron sort of as his sidekick. The fiction that we were the ones that led to the NATO intervention, of course, is prevalent.
You were leading from behind,
but it wasn't really. It was really almost a sense of inevitability.
It was inevitability, and on Libya, I need to note for our audience here that you were part of a meme. The Hillary, wasn't that in Libya on the trip? Where
that was flying from. That was flying from a different trip from Malta to Libya. Yes.
Because she's there with her sunglasses on.
I'm behind her.
And you're behind her.
Harold Coe and I are behind her.
Also on the Arab Spring and the Arab Awakening, what I was told by a lot of people who work with you, and it's not just your acumen and your knowledge of the region, your knowledge of language, but how you dealt with people in the department that were working long hours. And you would make jokes oftentimes where people are like, saying the Arab Awakening. We have all these meetings, and you're like, can we have an Arab nap? Can we and those sort of personal touches, I know people that have worked with you and for you and things like that, that matters a lot in terms of the style of leadership, the humanistic point that you were trying to make, right?
I mean, I felt blessed by the staff I had.
Yeah.
Throughout my career.
Yeah.
I really did. And so I tried to, I tried not to micromanage. I tried to empower them because I think they were good. You know, if there's a Lebanon desk officer, that Lebanon, and I'm assistant secretary, I've only got a few seconds for Lebanon. That person's following Lebanon every day.
Day in, day out.
And I need to defer to that person. It was sort of my attitude.
Yeah, and this is sort of, and before I get to your sort of personal story, question I ask folks all the time is when you talk about this sort of trying to micromanage from the NSC, the world, and this instinct, you know, and people I think who are very genuine and want the best out of America's engagement in the world, but how do you strike that right balance, again, between, again, these are maybe overly simplistic, but the Trump model of like one guy who is loyalists who just implement and he thinks of something and then shifts and things like this, and what you were dealing with and had to deal with in the Obama administration, first term, Biden a little bit, of the micromanagement.
I don't think that we're very good at setting what are, I think we need to be a much better job about setting, these are the specific policy goals.
Yeah.
And then let the embassy and the desk work on those policy goals.
Empower them, like you said.
Because I think that we end up having a muddle where everything becomes part of the discussion.
Right.
In fact, the White House should set a very specific policy, and check in. You need some accountability on embassies and on State Department and military staff, but not assume they aren't doing it just because you didn't have a meeting.
Yeah. Good.
I do want to, Brian, since we talk about lessons learned, I do want to bring up something on the Cedar Revolution if I can.
Sure, yeah. And I'm sorry, I don't want to give Lebanon the short shrift. We love Lebanon, yeah.
No, yeah. we all love Lebanon. but I learned something I think really important in Lebanon that I took to my UN career, and I still think about.
Make sure your best picture's on those posters that people are hitting with their shoes. Yeah, no.
By the way, on that picture with people hitting me on my shoe, my mother, unlike my wife, my mother sent me an email and said, "Jeff, I saw the pictures of Hezbollah hitting your photo with the shoe. I'm flying to Lebanon and I'm joining the Hezbollah demonstration because Feltman should go home."
Oh, and she's still in Ohio with us.
She's still in Ohio. Her 89th birthday last week.
God bless.
Anyway, but no, think about, okay, I got to Lebanon in 2004. In 2004, the Syrian intelligence was still running everything.
Yeah.
You had the Syrian military occupying Lebanon.
Yeah.
And at the time, the French and the Americans, it's a long story, but George Bush and Jacques Chirac sort of had a condominium to get past the fights over Iraq.
Yeah.
Over Lebanon. And they agreed that we should work to push the Syrian military and intelligence assets out of Lebanon. France and the United States together. We got Saudi Arabia on board with us. Saudi Arabia, of course, being close to Rafik Hariri, who was then prime minister. So we passed Security Council resolution, couple of it, 1559, 1680, to try to encourage the Syrians to leave. We were doing all this stuff, but there was nothing happening locally. So it was we were sort of all. There were Lebanese who were quietly egging us on, like they liked what we were doing, but they had this cute little opposition group, Kornet Shahwan, but there wasn't really any momentum locally.
Right.
So we were all pushing, but nothing was really happening. We were being an irritant to the Syrians, but didn't have a practical impact. Then, of course, Rafik Hariri was murdered, assassinated, and lots of others killed him in the bombings attack. Then you had this massive outpouring on the street. What became the March 14th movement. Had we not been paying attention, had we not been there pushing, saying the Syrians have to leave, that March 14th movement would have been, broken up violently. But we were all pushing in that direction. So my lesson is, you've got to have inside outside working in the same direction.
Right.
You've got to get insiders and the outsiders all pushing in the same direction if you want to have a real impact.
Yeah, when I think about this, and I'm sorry, but I wish we had like 10 more minutes, 15 more minutes to talk about this. Your tenure as ambassador to Lebanon was 2004 to 2008, and then you became the assistant secretary. What a tumultuous time, but a lot of lessons learned from that period. Spoiler alert, our friend Hisham Melhem is in the room, and he's going to actually be a future guest on this podcast. We're very happy about it. He was in Lebanon when Rafik Hariri was killed. And that was a seismic moment, literally. I mean, it actually shook the ground.
I was supposed to have lunch with someone at a restaurant right near where Rafik Hariri was blown up.
Yeah.
But I had my previous meetings with Amin Jamal, the former president. Amin Jamal wouldn't shut up.
Okay.
He kept talking and talking and talking. I kept saying, I'm late for my lunch. I'm late for my lunch. I'm late for my lunch.
Wow.
So I wasn't at the restaurant next door because of Amin Jamal.
Amazing. And because he wouldn't talk, would stop talking, which is a problem in the Middle East that we all know of, right? Like, I have a theory that a lot of things could get done in the Middle East if people could just put a sock in it, right? Like, just to get to the point. And we're having a problem here at this podcast to do that because we're running a little bit long, right? But I hope people are entertained by it. I wish we could talk some more about it, but I want to close out with something I always do with all of our guests. I hope that, and I know that future generations are listening, because I see these as not just interviews to learn from distinguished diplomats like you, but also to tell people some lessons about what you've learned and what they should do in their career. Before I get into sort of the questions on that, let me just confirm some things I learned about you in the last couple of days. True or false? You were part of the longest ponytail contest in the State Department, and whether you could grow a long ponytail and not get fired. True or false?
That's true, but how did you figure that out?
I am a researcher extraordinaire, if I'm not anything.
That was before I joined the Middle East. That was in Budapest.
Wow. What year?
1988.
Amazing. And you joined the Foreign Service when? What year?
86.
And leading into the sort of key questions, what's your origin story? What was the spark that got you into this amazing career you've had?
A couple things. I'm from a small town in the Midwest, Greenville, Ohio. It's near the Ohio-Indiana border.
Yeah.
And as school kids, we would go to the local museum. You have the field trips, like you go to the local museum, and it's a typical small town local museum, local history, that kind of stuff.
This is like the 70s, the 60s,
would have been the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah.
We go to the local museum.
Yeah.
In our local museum, along with all the local history stuff and grandma's china and stuff like that, is a set of T.E. Lawrence of Arabia's Bedouin robes.
Wow. Why?
And there's the Ottoman surrender flag from Bethlehem. And there's a original of the typewritten Allenby's First Military Order in Jerusalem.
Wow.
And there's the cloth that Kaiser Wilhelm II put over Salah ad-Din's tomb in Damascus.
Cool.
When he visited in the late 19th century.
But why? How did this get to?
Okay, so this is sort of fascinating as a little kid. It's like this, and T.E. Lawrence was a short guy. The robes, you can see from the robes, he was a short guy. Lowell Thomas, who was the radio broadcaster, who is from the same county I'm from.
Yeah.
Lowell Thomas is the one who traveled with T.E. Lawrence. It was a symbiotic relationship. Lowell Thomas's radio broadcast made T.E. Lawrence famous. T.E. Lawrence made Lowell Thomas famous.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
And Lowell Thomas left his collection to the local museum.
Wow. So
I had this sort of weird fascination with the Middle East because of seeing these things in the museum. But the other thing was my horizons were not long. As I said, I grew up in a small town.
You went to Ball State?
In Ball State.
Is that where David Letterman went, right?
David Letterman went. And he dedicated the building to see students everywhere. But Ball State's only an hour west from where I grew up. I mean, my horizons were an hour west. That was my horizon. But I ended up in London doing one of these junior year abroad programs. And I ended up, I was an art major. I ended up at the Tate Gallery, taking classes at the Tate Gallery.
Wow.
It was then just on the Millbank. Wasn't Tate Modern. And I decided, hey, I'd never lived in a city before. I'd never really been around foreigners before.
Right.
I'd never traveled extensively before. I traveled all over Europe during that time I was in London. I thought, I kind of like this.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I want to be a cultural attaché because I could combine art and this foreign travel. I didn't know what a cultural attaché was. It was before the internet. It just sounded good.
Yeah.
So someone back at Ball State, a professor said, that means you got to take the Foreign Service exam.
Uh-huh.
I said, oh. So I took the Foreign Service exam.
Where do you remember where you took it?
Chicago.
Uh-huh.
And I failed. Well, I should have failed. I was an art major from Ball State University. I should have failed. So then I thought, if I'm serious about this, I better actually do something. So then I went to Fletcher. How I got accepted to Fletcher School, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
It must be one of those things where my file was so weird that
they're like, wow, this is curious. Let's see what happens here.
Yeah, I graduated from Fletcher. And at this point, I got serious about foreign service, about service to the country, all this.
Yeah.
I failed the Foreign Service exam a second time.
And at first you don't succeed, try again, right?
And and at this point, I had student loans.
What did your parents think at this time? What was mom and dad
Well, I
thinking?
think my parents were relieved I wasn't trying to make a career in art.
Uh-huh.
And so then I took a job in New York City and moved to New York and lived in New York for a few years and took the Foreign Service exam again a few years later. And that time I did pass.
Yeah. So one of the last question is sort of when people who are out there, and especially the younger generation, wants to do what you've done in your amazing career, what advice would you give them today in 2025 based on your path and everything you did? Persistence obviously is one of them. Keep going at it because you did it. The exam 3 times at least, or
3 times. My wife, Mary, was head of Foreign Service recruitment in her last job. She says I'm the only person she knows who actually admits having failed the Foreign Service exam multiple times. She says I know people have.
Yeah.
She was in charge of recruitment, but you're the only one that admitted it.
Yeah.
That's it. And she passed on the first time.
Yeah.
But she's a Berkeley graduate.
Of course. Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone who's listening to this and they're out there and they're thinking, okay, I want to have a cool career like this, but I see what's happening in Washington. There's all this change. Like, what are the things they should do?
Well, I mean, I think that the qualities that I've seen of successful Foreign Service officers I guess they're successful that don't follow this, but I say that you need to have curiosity, humility, because
Yeah.
you're not always right,
Yeah.
patience,
Mhm.
and flexibility.
Mhm.
Flexibility, because whether it's because the portfolio is changing immediately because of the Arab Spring, or it's because of you're moving posts. Those are sort of the qualities that you need.
Yeah.
But I would say in today's world, I look at myself as the diplomatic equivalent of your parent that couldn't program the VCR, because there are all sorts of new tools.
Like what?
You need to learn. You need to understand AI. You need to understand what does it mean to have autonomous weapon systems. These things affect our national security now.
Yeah.
And so I would say that there needs to be, besides the qualities I mentioned, a real understanding of what's driving foreign and security policy in today's world, which are less the sort of traditional languages and more functional issues.
Yeah. So the things you said, and you're an arts major, right? Like
I was an art major, I was a fine arts major.
Yeah, and the curiosity, a lot of the qualities you talked about is having what some people say a high EQ, just being able to understand and connect and absorb a lot of things. But then the curiosity part of it, like being open to new ideas and try to integrate it. Because when I talk to people, younger folks, and you got a few years on me, not that much. But when I talk to people who are coming up, and I'm saying, well, the key part of it is you got to have an open mind.
Yes, I agree.
And try to
100%.
connect with as many people, as difficult as it is some days, people who even have different views of you. And you've done that as a diplomat around the world in many complicated situations and things like that. And I want to thank you for it. And I want to thank you for coming on Taking the Edge Off the Middle East. I've had a lot of fun chatting with you. We're going to continue the discussion with our buddy Hisham and others over a drink after all of this. It's a real honor to have known you for all these years and to have you on the program here. Thanks for your time and joining with us.
Well, thanks for insisting that I come on the program. This was fun.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thanks you for tuning in to Taking the Edge Off the Middle East. You can follow us at mei.edu on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and all of those other places. And we'll be seeing you soon. This is Brian Catullis signing off.